And so my understanding is that unfortunately the sheriff could not be here today. So if you'll introduce yourself and proceed.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'm Jeff Kramer. I'm the undersheriff with the Sheriff's Office. And County Commissioners, thank you for having me. I am here on behalf of Sheriff Roybal, who unfortunately could not be here. Believe me, if he could be, he would, but he is quite sick, so he couldn't make it in today. So I have the privilege to be here before all of you today to talk about the Sheriff's Office critical needs for 2024. So I appreciate the time this morning. Hopefully, I am as quick as Mr. Borman on how to drive the machine here this morning. Great. So on the beginning of our presentation, we identified and kind of laid in the basic structure of our strategic plan, which basically points right towards the goals for the Sheriff's Office for the Sheriff's first term. I'm not going to read through the first several slides, but we put that in there on purpose so that we can specifically return back to and point out the fact that our critical needs that we identify in the presentation, in the slides that follow, directly connect to those goals and objectives that the sheriff has for his first term in office, which directly relates to community trust, which is to increase community trust through improved communications and transparency, reduce victims, which of course is to reduce the number of crime victims in the community, quality service, which we do through improving the quality of service provided to the citizens with a qualified and engaged workforce dedicated to continuous improvement. And then lastly, legislation, which you know the sheriff is very engaged on this front by proactively support responsible legislation and work to combat legislation which is bad for public safety and contrary to a healthy and safe community. These slides simply point towards some objectives that are kind of sub-bullets to those things and the ways that we intend on accomplishing those. And if you were to read through the strategic plan that we have that's already out for public consumption, posted in different areas on our website and in other places, what you'd see is our 7 divisions within the office did fantastic work through the division commanders and other leaders in identifying how those particular divisions would contribute and move forward in being able to flesh out and accomplish these very comprehensive objectives and the way we're going to move forward over the next 4 years plus. To state our critical needs right up front, and then I'll explain the justification for those in the slides that follow. Our first request is for an additional $2.5 million to cover the costs and expenditures required for our contracted medical provider in the jail. All of you sitting before me are all too familiar with the importance of the medical contract and a very qualified and robust vendor inside our jail providing those medical services for our inmate population. The second request is for $500,000 to cover increased costs for extraditions. Over the past few years, we have witnessed a significant rise in expenses related to extraditions, including the area of staffing and the costs related to overtime and just salaries for the deputies that are responsible for conducting those, as well as transportation and travel costs for extraditions, and then of course the administrative overhead as well. The escalating costs in both of these areas have compromised some of our ongoing delivery for high quality and services that we deliver to the community. And in order for us to continue that high expectation that all of you have, as well as the community members have for the delivery of public safety services, it is important that we ask for these critical needs and increase staffing in these, or I'm sorry, increase funds in these areas, and that we secure those funds so that we can continue to deliver those services in the way and manner that all of you expect us to do in the community as well. When you think about those pillars, the strategic plan pillars that I mentioned before, and you consider the critical needs that I just mentioned, they of course tie directly back. I'm not going to belabor that point, but if you think about, for instance, the medical provider in the jail and the increasing cost there and the need for increased funds in that matter, obviously, it's very important as it relates to our inmate population that we do a fantastic job in delivering the best medical care that we can. As all of you know, part of that contract for medical care for our inmate population does in fact include mental health care for the inmate population. All of you have had numerous occasions to visit the facility and hear about cases and circumstances that we face and our deputies face and our professional staff members face inside the facility where mental health is the driving factor behind incidents, use of force incidents, and other things. And it is oh so important that we have a medical provider inside the jail that delivers not only that acute type care for medical services, but also comprehensive mental health care as well. And of course, that's part of these contracts in the past and ongoing moving forward. And so in order for us to be able to do that and to make sure that we have qualified vendors coming in, we need to make sure that those costs are recognized because they have gone up over the years, which you'll see in the slides that follow. Of course, all of you are very familiar with the sheriff's statutory obligations in both of these areas. He is, by statute, the custodian of the jail and also statutorily mandated to transport prisoners, whether that's here locally or subject to extradition as well. Specifically on the comments and notes for medical expenditures and increases, this here shows the significant increase in rise in medical contract costs that we've seen as an office since 2016, where in 2016 we were sitting just north of about $5 million, and now in 2024 those costs will be sitting just at about $11 million. Breaking that down, same numbers, but just adding some additional information for you. When you consider the cost increase from 2016 to just into 2023, not considering the 2024 costs, the increase in costs was just above $4.3 million, which represents an increase of 182% in cost increase over that time. Obviously, it would be even more when you consider the cost increase rather from 2023 to 2024. When you consider the impact to our budget and the consumption of the budget, if you will, from the medical contract, it represents 30 to really actually about 40% of the operating budget. It is the largest single contract that we have within our budget for the Sheriff's Office, the medical contract, that is. Similar information, but just as it relates to the general fund budget and the percentage of that over that same time period, you see there that it consumes a significant portion of the general fund budget for the Sheriff's Office through that course of time. Moving on to extraditions. Extraditions are something that we stay extremely busy with, something that you're probably familiar with. The District Attorney's Office is who determines which defendants are going to be extradited, but it becomes the sheriff's statutory mandate to end up going and actually transporting those prisoners, as mentioned before. To give you an idea on volume, you see some overall kind of annual captures from 2022. We conducted 167 extraditions. And in 2023, from January through about the third week of September, we are already at 147. To break that down and what we're seeing kind of operationally week by week, we're doing anywhere from 3 to 5 trips per week for extraditions. We have to staff that with 2 deputies, at least 2 deputies per trip for safety and other reasons. Those trips might be something that requires, more often than not, requires a flight where we're having to fly somewhere to pick up that defendant. If it's close by, perhaps either in-state or an adjacent state, then we'll oftentimes, those deputies will do that on a road trip and drive a vehicle. We had been using an outside contractor to do extraditions for us, or at least kind of split the task, if you will. But COVID ended up having an impact on that because that outside contractor, when like so many of us and so many operations and businesses, they too were impacted. They started to have a problem with their own staffing. People didn't want to do that job too much. Thinking of the idea of getting into a van for a road trip with criminal defendants or inmates who likely had COVID. There were high occurrences of that, as you know. So they had trouble with their own staffing. And so they had trouble staffing the trips. They started to see increased costs. Those costs were passed on to us and other customers, if you will. So we saw costs increase, and we decided we needed to make a break from that. And we took them all in-house, if you will, primarily. And we started doing that as of about May of 2022. But those costs in terms of travel costs have continued to go up. And then, of course, you see the breakdown by category as it relates to the salary costs, whether that's paying for the deputies who are on the trips or backfilling by overtime for when they leave their primary post. If we have, for instance, a court services deputy who has to leave the courtroom, if you will, to go do an extradition, we have to backfill that post to fill the courtroom while the other deputy's on the trip. This lift is so significant, or has been so significant, we've had to reach and kind of do things differently, operation and office-wide, where we're asking for office-wide help to make this work. What we've seen previously is that our court services area, our court and transport area of the office, which is in our detention operations division, had been previously been able to kind of manage this lift kind of on their own within that division. Because of the sheer volume, that is no longer possible. And so we said, hey, we're going to have to look across the office and make this an office-wide ask for assistance to make these trips work. And so now what we'll see is we'll have, whether it's a patrol deputy or a deputy within a special operations area, assisting and going on these trips as well to kind of spread the burden, if you will, office-wide because of the sheer volume. You can see the costs associated with the number of extraditions that we're doing, and these continue to be pretty relentless in their volume and pace. Additionally, we purchased 4 vehicles, specifically for extraditions, a couple vans, and also 2 interceptors, Ford Interceptors, and 4 extraditions. As you can imagine, these vehicles mile out relatively quickly, or at least more quickly than other vehicles in our fleet, because they're doing long road trips. So to summarize, again, we're asking for the $2.5 million for the medical contract and the $500,000 for the extradition costs. You can see what that does as it relates to the 2024 base budget, just north of $62 million. When you add that $3 million total, you have a base budget there of $65 million. And of course, the PST restricted fund is down there on that bottom line there. Questions?
Commissioner Vandenberg.
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation this morning. And I'm sorry that Sheriff Roybal couldn't be here. I'm certain that his heart is in this, and he's probably watching. And I just want to if he is watching, I just want to thank him for the great work that he's doing as well. But also thank you for the entire team. And I know what a challenge the jail has been. It's been tough on everybody. We've received several briefings on some of the challenges that are there, and so appreciate your presentation here with regard to that. So that is just a big issue and a big concern, and I'm glad that we're doing an enormous amount of things, including what you've showed on the charts about the increase of the costs and so forth, and trying to address those problems in an even more effective way. I do want to ask a question, though, on the extradition expenditures. I believe what you said and everything about it, but I'm looking at chart 15, and I'm not sure how I get to at least from where the chart is presented, how you get to a $500,000 cost. If you look at the number of extraditions from 22 to 23, the number is down on the overall aggregate, but maybe it has something to do with the 94 to 130 about El Paso County. And then the miscellaneous expenses, looks like it's down. Salary is clearly up. That's a serious increase. And so forth and so on. I'm sure the vehicle cost in 2022 was just a one-time procurement that's going to last for several years, because I read the notes. So I believe that, you've got a valid request. I'm just not sure how I see that validation in the chart. So maybe you could explain that for me.
Sure, I think I can, Mr. Commissioner. Part of that is because in 2022 we have a split year, because you see the bottom note on the bottom left corner. In May of 2022, that's when we switched and started using internal personnel almost exclusively. Up to that time, we were using that external vendor a lot more, and so we had a lot of those costs were on that external contract. And so once we started doing that internally almost exclusively at that May timeframe, we started to recognize those costs that you see internally, and that's why as you look to those 2023 costs, they start to add up much much quicker because we see those in the salaries and our own internal fuel costs, vehicle costs, et cetera, different than what we saw in 2022 for almost the first half of that year. You may? I don't know.
Good morning, Commissioners. One thing I want to add to what our undersheriff said is I actually had that exact same question for our sheriff, and I asked what the rationalization behind that. And part of that isn't just the increase from 22 to 23. It's an increase that's been happening since 2020 that is not built into their base budget. And so the sheriff's office over the last couple of years has been able to absorb those higher costs because our public safety tax has been coming in fairly robustly. And now that that's leveling off and even falling a little bit, they can't sustain paying those costs out of their general fund like they could the last couple of years. And while that public safety tax is not initially designed to be able to pay for extradition costs, they were able to pay things out of public safety tax and use their general fund for extradition, but their budget cannot absorb that any longer. So these costs have really gone from just a couple of $100,000 a couple of years ago to now closer to $1 million a year. And so they really need this $500,000 as a supplement to their budget to be able to continue to process extraditions like they have been in the last couple of years. So it's not just the increase from 22 to 23 that we really should be looking at. It's more a sustained issue that's been happening the last couple of years.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful to have that context for this particular request here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Williams.
Well, I think the increase can also be related to the cost of fuel and such to get the inmates back here. The question I have is, I know that sometimes the state of Colorado houses prisoners in our jail, and they reimburse us. Is that still happening? And are the reimbursements still meeting the level we need to have them reimburse us for?
Yes, ma'am, it is. So the amount of reimbursement for DOC prisoners, for instance, is set by statute, so we follow that. But we also charge, for instance, for municipalities. So CSPD is our largest customer in terms of the number of arrestees that they bring to our facility, and so we also charge for those arrestees in the facility as well. All of those things are billed out very, very appropriately. Now, does that equal the actual? There's a difference between the actual cost it takes to house an inmate in the facility on a daily rate versus what we charge. But those things are all set and tracked, and we update those on an occasional basis by virtue of what the sheriff wants to do from term to term. But as it relates to DOC prisoners specifically, statutorily guided.
Okay, I appreciate that. I know one of the frustrating things to explain to constituents is that jail medical contract. So that continues to be a frustration as the costs increase, but it is something that we are required by law to provide. And as I say, even the federal government is smart enough to stay out of that one. They won't help us with it. So thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Good points.
Mr. Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And I appreciate actually Commissioner Williams's comments. And maybe you mentioned it and I just didn't pick it up, but you do provide services on behalf of the state. And I think I heard you say that what you can charge the state is set by statute. But I seem to recall in the past also, so maybe this is a question about if this is still valid or if something has changed in the last year or two, that what the state can reimburse you for is below what your actual costs are. So you actually eat some of that into your own general funds budget. So is that still true? And is there something that could be done about that, like maybe working legislatively to have that dollar figure adjusted to an appropriate number?
Yes, on both questions. It is still true in that the cost that is reimbursed, that is set by statute, is in fact lower than what it actually costs us to house a single inmate per day. The last numbers that I saw as an example, and this is even, I'll call it dated information, let's say about a year old, so it would have been old medical contract numbers, old food contract numbers, et cetera, put us at around $165 per day, roughly, to house an inmate per day. Whereas the reimbursement cost from DOC per day, Jane, do you have the number offhand? It's in like the 90s, I want to say, without having the number in front of me. And so there is a discrepancy there between those
Yeah,
figures.
I recall it was a pretty substantial difference. So I don't know what that looks like as far as the total scale and how many from the state you actually help, incarcerate in the jail. But it just seems to me it's just only fair to try to ask the state to maybe change that number. So love to, I imagine that you are always working on that, but I'd love to be part of asking the state to get that number to a realistic number. And then one other question I have for you, and it's just something that I just haven't heard. Perhaps I'll get all this in detail on the jail tour on Friday. But we were, prior to COVID, very, very close to the maximum numbers that were incarcerated in the jail. And then in COVID, the numbers went down substantially and so forth. I have to imagine it's probably been drifting back up. But where do we stand generally today as kind of a general average as far as how much occupancy is in the jail?
Commissioner, I'm happy to report that actually, although we did trickle back up after COVID kind of opened itself up a bit and the criminal justice world got back to a little bit normal pace, but we have not gone back up too terribly much. So at our lowest point during the COVID timeframe, we did go all the way down in the 800s. Having been up as high as up in the 1700s, which is what you're referring to. But we've only trickled back up to in the low 1200s. Currently today, we're sitting at about 1221. And that isn't too bad overall because our capacity, when you really consider the fact, we used to consider our capacity to be 1,837 beds, but really you have to actually reduce those numbers because the two sprung structures, we refer to them as the tents, those sprung structures on the north side of the campus there are not inmate ready, if you will. And so you have to reduce that 1,837 by 144 beds. And so whatever that math is, kind of in the high 1600s there, that would be our true bed count. And so we're at that, again, we're in those low 1200s compared against that high 1600 bed space available.
Great, thank you. Appreciate the update. I always had in the back of my mind it was somewhere around 1,700.
Yes, sir.
So that sounds like I'm pretty close. But I appreciate the update from kind of what has happened post-COVID. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, if there are no additional questions, I think that we are ready to move forward. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to Chair Bremer, who has just arrived, if that's okay. But we are coming up on the 4th Judicial District.
Thank you again for the time this morning.
Thank you.